In late March 2022, Chinese officials announced a complete lockdown of Shanghai, the center of China's manufacturing hub under its zero COVID policy. This was done to contain what is called the worst COVID-19 outbreak in the last 2 years. Millions of people forced to stay indoors, thousands of factories shut down, and streets empty for more than 2 months. On a macro scale, the lockdown areas covered 40% of the China's GDP, affected 80% of the country's shipping capacity, contracting the industrial output and worsening the already delayed supply chains by several more months. These reasons, along with the US-China trade war, caused instabilities in supply chains, forcing more than 50 companies to plan to move manufacturing from China to elsewhere. This wasn't the first time, and most definitely not the last. But this gets more interesting. Supply delays like these are for non-political reasons. To promote local manufacturing, most countries impose tariffs on imported goods. For example, in March 2018, the Trump administration raised tariffs by 25% on imports strategic to the US national interest. However, some countries increased tariffs to extract a political cause. This is called economic coercion, something that is increasingly prominent in the Chinese foreign policy. The recent rift between Australia and China works as a perfect example. Australia's economic dependence on China is striking. China is the largest export market for Australian goods, and we all can guess what happened next. Tariffs on these goods were increased by 200%, along with anti-dumping investigations on Australia. Businesses deferred from buying Australian coal, tourists discouraged from traveling to Australia, and students asked to explore higher studies elsewhere. Why? Australia's leading role in urging the World Health Organization to conduct an independent inquiry into the origins of COVID-19 irked China, causing the very economic sanctions. These events expose the practical fragility of the global supply chains and the ability to weaponize this economic dependence. This highlights the need to recast the previous model of efficiency from purely on the basis of the lowest cost towards resilient to geopolitical uncertainties. The new supply chains underlines this resiliency by diversifying the current supply chains and cooperating with the like-minded nations, shifting the industrial paradigm from the conventional short-term goals of just-in-time to the new long-term relationships of just-in-case. But some obvious questions appear, like why the conventional supply chains were established? Can the new supply chains be sustained in the long run? Can the new supply chains solve the economic coercion? And how will this reshape the future of manufacturing? With the end of the Cold War era, most businesses realized the need for low-cost production. This was achieved through globalization, which came through common governance structures and trade policies, recognized by the policymakers in the US, Europe, East Asia, and Latin America. The so-called Washington Consensus emerged as a byword for a new age where economic efficiency and specialization were given the most importance. Thousands of companies went in search of supply chains that can produce quality goods at the lowest wage. Washington Consensus flourished the era of economic growth, along with a dramatic reduction in the number of people living in extreme poverty. Global poverty fell from 1.9 billion people in 1990 to roughly 730 million people in 2015. This globalization model embraced China's national economic model, which enjoyed an unprecedented growth of 9.4% annually from 1978 to 2018. Regionally dense supplier networks, geographic proximity, and young skilled labor resulted in an environment of robust local manufacturing. This environment encouraged technical innovation, creating more young talents and working as a positive feedback loop. Shenzhen's hardware production networks, Shanghai's automotive sector, or the emerging Chengdu's technical innovation are living examples of this. But instead of democratizing and conforming to the international norms, Chinese leaders chose a very different direction. China's revanchist moves towards Taiwan, in line with Russia's actions towards Ukraine, reflected a high global uncertainty. This caused a geopolitical urge to shift supply chains out of a single region, predominantly from China to somewhere more reliable and localized. But investing more than was needed in local production creates more problems than solving them. Supply chain breakdown due to local transit issues, interstate competition, reduced innovation due to lack of global competition, and higher wages in most Western countries harms the actual efficiency, which form the very reason of offshoring. This is where the concept of friendshoring helps. Trade alliances like the recent Trade and Technological Council by the US and EU, Supply Chains Resilience Initiative by India, Japan, and Australia, and G7's commitment to strengthen supply chains are some significant steps. The main idea behind these partnerships is to trade with countries that share common values and visions. Commercial viability will still depend on cost effective production, meaning the labor efficient countries in the South and Southeast Asia will play an important role in restructuring the global supply chain. But this comes with a big challenge. The infrastructure gap in manufacturing industries and transportation systems compared to the conventional supply chains. This can be filled with direct investments in the long run. Another part of the strategy would be to distribute risk of single point failures, like the semiconductor manufacturing in Asia being focused mainly on Taiwan and China. But this can be challenging given the Chinese influence as a major sourcing location and a huge market for final consumption. If this discussion helps in understanding the why, what, and how of the new supply chains, please give a thumbs up to this video. Do subscribe to the channel if you're interested in learning more about geopolitics around energy and its impact on the economy.